Hi, my name's James. Welcome to my ramblings. Actually, welcome to segment one of podcast episode number one of my ramblings. And you might ask yourself, well, what is that all about anyway? And here's the thing. This segment is going to explain why the ramblings exist and to introduce you to the concept that we're going with. So, in the show notes below, whether you're watching this on YouTube or you're listening to it on Anchor, there will be a breakdown of the minute mark to jump to if you're not interested in a segment. Each podcast is going to be consisted of 3 segments. This particular podcast, segment 1, is going to be the explanation of the concept and who I am and why I'm here. And then segment 2 is going to be actually a review of 2 TV shows that I recently binge watched. One is Space Force. The other one is Stargirl. 2 very different TV shows. We're going to talk about those. So you'll be able to jump straight to the section that you want by looking at the notes below, or you can listen to the whole thing. My anticipation is this is going to be a 45-minute to 1.5 hour in completion, all 3 segments podcast. If you think that's too long, please let me know. I will have contact information below in the show notes and in the comments if you're on YouTube. So, by the way, YouTube, a little bit different for you guys. Each segment is going to be an individual video, so you can just pick the ones you want. Today's Wednesday. It is June 24th, 2020. Best year ever. I mean that completely sarcastically. It's really not. But we don't need to get into that. Y'all know what you've been living through. We don't need to go any further into that, do we? So here we go. My name's James Bennett, and I'm pushing 50. I'm getting pretty close to that, I don't know, I guess you'd say midlife. I don't know, how long do people live anymore? You know, my family seems to live to be pretty old, but you know, who knows? Anyway, I guess middle age is as good a title as anything. And about 10 years ago, maybe even longer, I was an early adopter into the podcast world. I actually ran multiple podcasts. They were all panel casts. None of them were single like this, so this is a new adventure for me. We had All Things Geek, which was based off of a radio show that on a station that got sold with Bounce Radio. We did Dead Television Society, where we only reviewed TV shows that have been canceled or that we felt had been canceled too soon. We had the Vamungus podcast, which is V Among Us, for the television show V. Actually, that one was huge. It was our best rated podcast. It was the number 1 V podcast in the world at its time. And we got to meet Jace Hall, the producer, doing that one. There was also, the King cast on the TV show Kings. It was canceled very quickly. And we did one on Life on Mars as well. So quite a few podcasts over the years. I've guested on podcasts. And then maybe like 4, 5, 6 years ago, my career took a new trajectory where I was traveling more, and I kind of pod faded, and I really, really, really regretted that. So I spent the last couple of years playing with the idea and even attempting to bring back a couple niche podcasts. I'm a hotelier by trade, so I had the Social Hotel Guy podcast back in the day, which did rather well. So I tried to do Hotelcast, and it just didn't really get any traction. And then I thought, maybe I'll do All Things Geek again, but I'm going to call it Every Geek because I thought that was a really hip and highbrow name after the everyman concept in literature. And that didn't really go great either because when I pod faded, I kind of game faded too. So I really wasn't as current a geek as I needed to be to do, a gaming or sci-fi podcast. So that didn't work. And then it occurred to me, it was actually Troy Price. Troy, who is a great podcaster in his own right, and who we have guested on each other's shows at various times. said, hey, why don't you do segments? And I went, well, he said more than that, but that particular, actually everything he told me just resonated, it was like an epiphany. Wow. And then I realized, why am I trying to do a niche cast? Because the Everyman was, or Every Geek was closer to it. I like a lot of things. I travel a lot. I know a lot about hotels. I love science fiction, novels and television and movies. I'm obsessed with movies. I love gaming. I'm an avid, semi-regular gamer. Right now, just Minecraft and World of Warcraft. But I played all kinds of games in the past with groups of people and raid groups and what have you. And I love coffee and I love scotch. So all of those things, and beer. I really love beer. All of those things are things that I talk about regularly. And it occurred to me that that's my brand, is that I just like to talk about random stuff. I kind of ramble. On top of that, when I was in college, I had a collection of poetry that I was had self-published, and it was called Ramblings of a Lunatic. And in it, I did a epic free verse poem called Isolation. And that isolation piece became part of a larger installation piece for my art degree. So I used it for my English degree and my art degree. So that's what you saw in the last video if you're on YouTube. So by way of explanation, I guess, I've been rambling my whole life. So when building a brand, you're supposed to ask your friends, and this is like one of those recommendations, how they identify you. And I was getting all over the board, because I got friends from all these different aspects of my life, and to each of them, I'm something different. But all of them thought it was a good idea that I had something worthwhile to say. So we're going to give it a shot, and hopefully you guys are with me, right? I mean, because if you're not, then I'm just talking to myself, and I do that anyway. So what's the point? So let's go back to Images of Isolation when the ramblings first began. I was in University of Laverne. This was in the 90s. I thought I was going to be an English professor or a writer or a poet or an artist. And none of that, I've done all of those things, on a personal, hobbyist, amateur level. But none of those panned out as a career. Ironically, I worked in college at various hotels to pay for college. So that ended up being my career. Flash forward 30 years later, I'm still doing it. On furlough currently, but about to go back soon, which is why the timing of the podcast came about. So, I've got a dual major. It was actually a major and a minor, right? So my major was literature with a Shakespearean emphasis, and my minor was in art history, which was actually a program they developed specifically because of my interest. So thank you, University of Laverne. Thank you, Ruth Trotter, my advisor, for creating that hybrid degree for me. And I was of the opinion that I could do one very large project and accommodate both. And I wouldn't recommend that because the work involved was through the roof. It was almost a deal breaker. I almost didn't make it through college. I'm serious. I had a horrible car accident the day before my last final because I fell asleep at the wheel less than a mile from my house. So I don't recommend it, but at the time it sounded like less work. It ended up being more. So what I did, in the video, there's a small sculpture. That sculpture is a piece of greenware. My emphasis in art was in ceramics. And so I used a surrealist method to create the sculpture from an image that I had come up with in just a random art class of a woman huddled over looking away. So to do this, I did it blindfolded from a single block of clay, 1 pound block of clay, and I did it uninterrupted, so I didn't take any breaks. And it took me about an hour and a half. And that's the end result. I might insert a picture here if I figure out how to do that. I'm kind of new to this video stuff. But then I took this piece of greenware, and I took it to my friend. His name was Bertram Delaray Moreau III, and he was a music major. He did composition, musical compositions. And I said, hey, can you write me a piece? And I don't want to tell you anything about this, but I'm going to give you this sculpture for a week and see what you come up with. So he said, sure. So meanwhile, I'm got a photo of the piece that I've got, and I've got it pinned to my little notebook, which I carried everywhere. And I set about writing an epic free verse poem. So you're not having any repeats of consonants or assonants. There's no meter to it. There's a lot of rules about being free verse, but essentially, it's kind of like riffing, right? So I riffed this free verse poem, which ended up being, I think it's about 12 minutes in length. So, ironically, his piece of music was of a similar length. Then we sat down one night and recorded my reading the poem over his track. So this was done with tape, audio tape for you youngins before digital. That's why the quality kind of sucks, and sometimes the music comes over the voice. We had a very small MIDI mixing board. We weren't super savvy with it. We did the best we could. So that was it. That last video was the end result of our collaboration, and along with a couple of small shots of the installation piece. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you got something out of it. I hope you don't hate it. But let me know below, even if you did hate it, because I thrive off the feedback. I gotta have it. Got to have it. Must have. Please give. Let's do this. All right. So we're hitting the 12-minute mark here. I think I've talked enough about why I ramble and why I'm a podcaster and why you should listen to me. In the next segment, we're going to talk about Stargirl and Space Force, two series that came out during the COVID quarantine, for lack of a better phrase. So hopefully you join me for that. If you're on YouTube, you'll probably see it 24 hours later. If you're listening on Anchor, there'll be a short break, and then we'll be back. Guys, thanks for hanging in with me for segment 1, episode 1 of my ramblings. I'm James. I'll see you on the next one.